We don't have time. I have a question about the passes we got, but I'll clarify it later.
Are you counting heads?
I was.
You haven't got Susan yet.
Okay.
Right, it is 7 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started, if you can hear me okay. Welcome to the USD290 board meeting. It is October 26, 2020 at 7 p.m. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order and start with a roll call. Please raise your hand and identify yourself when your name is called. Linda Alderman,
Present.
Chris Cunningham, Julie Dandrio, present, Susan Moore, Shanda Olmsted,
Present.
Lydia Payne,
Present.
Harold Wingert.
Present.
So we have 5 board members present this evening right now. Susan Moore may join us in a little bit remoting in, so we'll keep an eye out for her. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's moved by Linda Alderman and seconded by Harold Wingert that we approve tonight's agenda. All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 6-0. Susan Moore has joined us. Hi, Susan. We do have a couple items on the consent agenda. Dr. Cobbs, do you want to share anything with us about that?
No, they're pretty self-explanatory.
Perfect. We just have the negotiated agreement revisions and then the approval of some surplus materials. So would somebody like to make a motion that we approve the consent agenda?
Madam President, I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
It was moved by Harold Wingert and seconded by Linda Alderman that we approve tonight's consent agenda. All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 6-0 as well. We do not have any comments from the public this evening, so we're going to move on to reports and presentations. We do have one item that we're taking action on tonight, and that is about the Lincoln lot. Dr. Cobbs.
So early last week, I got maybe a week and a half ago, I got a call from Kyle Thurman, who is one of the partners in the Heartland firm that purchased the Lincoln lot from us towards the end of the school year in 2020. With the request that we would consider selling the 2 lots that had been held out for USD290 for our possible building trades program to build on at some point in time within the next 5 years. Obviously, their construction is going well there, and they would like to finish the entire project without necessarily waiting on USD290 to continue. I told him that we would have this conversation as a board. We put it in the update. There wasn't a lot of response with that, but it's certainly something that we need to discuss and make some decisions on. The contract indicated that the 2 lots would be sold to them, at least with first right of refusal, for $12,000. The 2 lots together brought the whole packaged, I think, to $100,000 or very close to $100,000 in the end. But the idea behind that was that if USD 290 and Ottawa High School were to ever put a building trades program back together, that there would be 2 lots there that we could build off of without having to purchase a lot as we move forward with those programs. Obviously, they would like to move forward on their end. The issue for us in terms of a building trades program is one, that the cost of starting one is fairly immense. That you'd be ultimately taking on the cost of an entire housing project through your capital budget as it begins to replenish itself upon the sale and so on and so forth. the teacher that we've discussed doing this with is less than comfortable with it at this point. Has never built a house before. Is more in tune to small construction projects and cabinetry, which is what they're doing now, and not necessarily the full-on construction project. We have continued to explore whether or not it's in USD 290's best interest to actually house the program under USD 290, or if we provide a college-style course with construction trades through Neosho County or Flint Hills or whichever group would want to pick it up, or if we would provide the course with the instructor but have it be taught as a partnership with some other construction entity. For example, if we wanted to use Heartland as the example in this, while they're building those houses, if our construction program has a class that helps them within the project to learn the trade and go through those things without USD 290 being responsible for the home, for the liability insurance of the home, for the sale of the home, and then the purchase of a new lot and the construction down the road. One of the things that might be a misnomer in terms of what we were able to do with construction projects in the last portions of the building trades program is that because our kids nor our teacher were certified electricians or plumbers, they were not allowed to do those things. Basically, what our kids did was the stick frame of the house and then sheetrocking and those types of things. So not all aspects of the house were built by our kids. So there's some. I think most people thought that our kids built the house from start to finish, but even the concrete work we did not do. There were a lot of those things that we contracted out to other people, again, at a cost to the district that we incurred until the sale of the house in which we replenished those items. The last two houses, I believe, came in with the sale of the house being less than what we had actually paid to construct the house. So we were actually losing money on the projects. So that's just some information about the construction projects in general in terms of the building trades classes. I would be happy to try to answer any questions that anybody might have about the lots or whether or not this board feels inclined to sell them back to Heartland.
And I think we'll do this discussion in two parts. First, if anyone does have any questions for Dr. Cobbs first, and then we'll move into some discussion after that. Anyone have any questions?
I had a question.
Yes, Lydia?
If we do sell it, then would that go into our capital funds?
Yeah, I think it would go back to capital outlay. Yeah. Yeah. It can't go to the general fund. The general fund is a different entity. Our LOB is a different entity. So really the only fund that we can put money back into would be the capital fund. Yes, sir.
Dr. Cobbs, I had a question. If we were to sell, which again, I've kind of weighed back and forth, I think ultimately we'll sell. I think for me, the question is when, okay? I think you're right. What you laid out probably doesn't, it's not likely we'll do a construction program like we thought a couple years ago. Is it better to sell now in the 2021 financial year, or is it better to wait till after July 1 and put that money into next year's capital budget? So if the state is looking at, I know when we talked about the track, there was some discussion about, having to, and I know it's only $25,000, but I mean, and our capital budget's much greater than that, but
Yep.
Is there an advantage one way or another to sell before or after July 1?
I wouldn't say so. I think, again, the one of the conversations we had with the track was that we wanted to make sure our capital budget didn't extend past a percentage of our overall general fund. It is something that the state looks at. I think we're in pretty good shape with our capital budget. That $25,000 is not going to impact it greatly one way or the other. I think that one of the things that we should consider is that holding off, if that entity moves on, I'm not fearful that we wouldn't be able to sell it at some point in time. But there's a lot of things that are happening positively in that area with Heartland at this point. And if we're going to sell, we might as well do it now.
Sure.
It would seem to make sense. If we're not going to sell, then okay, we're going to hang on to it, and we'll see if we can't put together some sort of construction trades program or building trades program. I think that the concern that we have is whether or not it will. I think when we started the conversation, we remembered what it was like with Bob the Builder, if you remember Bob, and all of the great things that we did in building the houses, and there are houses over here that were built, there are houses on 17th Street that were built. And that is probably not doable or even conceivable in this climate. One, paying a construction, we'd probably have to find somebody that was on the verge of retirement in construction, because the amount of money that we'd pay as a teacher is probably not going to come close to the amount of money that they can make in the construction trades. Two, you're going to wind up with somebody who probably does not have a lot of experience with instruction, so you kind of get lucky with how we can teach kids in that environment. And we certainly were lucky with Bob. He did a great job, and Mark Laws and everybody that was involved in those programs. So it's just kind of a hit and miss at this point. I think we really wanted to, at one point in time, we'd actually save some money. You know, when Bob retired a few years ago, we'd actually save that money to try to bring it back. And we'd open it up every year to see if there was interest in filling the position, and just couldn't find it. So we've started looking at other options. One would be, like I said, post-secondary institutions providing the instructor for us and the program for us, which again takes some liability out of our hands. But two, even with an instructor that may not feel comfortable building the house, but if they can be the instructor that facilitates the cooperation between our kids and a construction entity, we would be probably better served in that capacity.
Okay.
Yes.
It's been quite some time, I believe, but 287 did have a building trades program, and I believe that instructor was fairly young and still employed by 287 last time I knew. Have you explored any opportunities within any of the other surrounding districts?
In terms of partnering,
Right.
our requests for partnership have not gone very well.
Okay.
For a lot of different reasons. It's not something that we've explored in this particular situation, but we have had partnerships with Anderson County, we've had partnerships with West Franklin in technology, we've had partnerships with multiple entities to try to do some of those things, and it hasn't worked out very well for us. Now, we've had greater luck in people coming to us. Wellsville and West Franklin both come to our entities. But that's certainly something that we can look at to see if our students would be.
Because I know the individual that ran that program when Kyle and Kelsey were there, he did an amazing job. And he
Yes,
folled in his father's
Yep,
footsteps.
they have a great program, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Yep. But I will reach out to West Franklin and see if there's at least, if there's at least an opportunity for our kids to be able to participate in those courses through West Franklin's program versus ours.
And, they may not have one anymore, but if there were, the possibility of cooperating with them.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
I had one more. Is it costing us anything to hold on to these lots?
No.
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 So if we decided to see if there were any other opportunities, it wouldn't be costing us anything?
No, and we don't pay taxes on them. We don't do it. The only cost that would be associated, and it's a minimal cost, would be that as soon as houses go on them and somebody gets in them, then there's a taxation that occurs that comes back to us. But the taxation on those houses is minimal in the grand scheme of things. I don't know that would be the thing that would say we need to sell it now. But if you're looking at associated costs, there would be some tax dollars that would be associated with those houses being built and filled.
With the current building that's happening around those lots, is there any community impact in a negative way by us not going ahead and selling those and allowing development to happen at this point?
Well, I think that the conversations that we've had with Richard Neinstead at the city and with Paul Bean with FCDC is that there's a great deal of excitement that is surrounded with Heartland and the residential growth on the north side of town. There's also some conversations. Apparently, there was just some law with some taxation law that allowed the city to have access to the coves that are also over there to begin expansion of those areas. So I know that they're excited about growth on the north side of town. We've seen a lot of growth here on the south side of town, but the north side has been left pretty much undisturbed with the exception of the apartments that went in over by Lincoln or the duplexes or whatever they happen to be. Now the Lincoln lot and of course if the coves can do some things over there. So I don't think that they would ever come out and say, you guys holding on to this is a detriment to our city. I think they would indicate that it would be nice to have as many new houses available in that area as they could have. But again, I don't think that they would come out and say USD 290 for the betterment of the city, you need to do this. I think they recognize that land is ours, and we can do with it what we choose to do with it. And what, for 15 years now, 10 years now, the lot has remained vacant without much consideration. So 2 more lots is probably not going to create much of a stir.
Does anyone have any strong feelings they want to share about selling the lot or keeping the lot? Anyone?
Go ahead, you go.
You know, I came in trying to figure out that I probably wasn't sold one way or the other, but I'm probably leaning towards going ahead and selling it. It probably is time to go ahead and sell. You know, there's not an advantage to wait till after July 1. It probably is. Makes sense that Heartland's there doing work. You know, you're kind of go ahead and finish if they do move on. Not that they won't come back,
Right.
but, you know, it does kind of make sense that. And, you know, if we're really not doing, if you just think even if we would vote to do a construction program now, the ramp-up time would be kind of long. And then, like you just said, there's going to be other opportunity, whether it's coves or it's another lot out south or something. So for me, I'm probably ready to make a motion if you're ready for one.
Did anyone have any other discussion?
I wanted to comment. I personally think that we should sit on it. If it comes to that we should sell it, then that would what we should do. But I don't see why it would be in any rush to do it if it's not costing us anything. And if there's just, I mean, Shanda brought up a great idea. You know, if there's any chance of an opportunity for our students, I think that we should probably make sure we've explored all those options, because it is a great opportunity for them. I mean, look what our teachers came up with to do with that bus that we thought we were just going to trade in, and that's turned into a great opportunity for the students. So, I mean, I think that if it's not costing us anything and we haven't ruled out all the possibilities, that we could just keep sitting on it, would be my thought.
Before I ask for a motion, I do want to clarify that we are not voting on a construction program tonight, right? Just for anybody that's watching. I know that it's come up, right? I mean, I know that that's what we're talking about here, but this, whether we sell the lot, whether we keep the lot, has no
Right.
basis on our thoughts or anything about having a construction program. We want the best things for our kids, and that's something that we haven't even delved into figuring out how or what that would look like or anything. So that's not related to this vote at all. This is just about selling the lots. So I just want to clarify that.
How many years do you think it would take us to get a construction program up and running? 3, 4?
I don't know that it would take that long if we had the right staff. What I do think would take some time is that if we're going to be responsible for building a house. Now, if you remember the last house we sold, the contract indicated that within the first month or so, any issues still with the house befell upon USD 290, which is probably not out of the ordinary. But everything from a ceiling fan was wobbly to whatever meant that Bob and Mark were going over there to fix the issues with the house. And we spent a lot of time outside of class and what should have been working on the next project, trying to polish up that one. The other part of it is we paid a pretty extensive extra duty rate to Bob and Mark to finish and do the cabinetry and the finish work and the crown molding and all of those things in the summertime outside of their contract. So a lot of the house was not being completed by our students. But I would not feel comfortable starting a project this year and saying that we're going to build a house and not have gone through all of the things to teach our kids how to build those things, knowing that the liability that exists with it would be ours. Now, I know that somebody's going to inspect and somebody's going to go through all those things to make sure that it's right. But I think in the end, we wind up contracting more to do those things than we would if we waited. If you think about the number of years it takes for kids to get to the completer side, you're probably looking at really 3 years of kids starting in a program to learn how to do these things, and then actually being able to apply the knowledge in a professional setting. So I think that you could get one started pretty quickly. Whether you're able to build a house, I would probably give that a couple of years before we tried to go down that trail.
Yeah, I guess my thinking is much along Harold's line of thinking, in that Heartland's there, they're building the houses, they've got all the equipment there, they're ready to go. And by the time we're ready to go, there will be another lot somewhere that we can buy and start.
There will be, it's interesting the way that things play out. 2 years ago, one of the first things that was tasked of me as the superintendent is to get rid of the Lincoln lot. Right, we got to sell the Lincoln lot, and here we are still talking about pieces of the Lincoln lot. And I think we've come a long way. I think that the initial expectation was to sell. We had indicated that maybe we could parcel off a few things for something that we could do in the future. We've not acted upon any of those things, not even previously to coming to the conclusion that we might do it, nor in this time being able to feel like we can expand programming and do some of those things. So I don't know that that anytime soon we'll have the capacity to expand CTE programming. The cost is extensive. The amount of dollars that we get back from the teaching contract for construction trades or building trades was pretty minimal because there aren't a lot of students, right? You can't have 25 students in a class. You're typically taking 7 or 8 students, which means that you have limited FTE weightings that go along with it. What will always be available to us, depending on how much we want to spend, will be lots available in our area for sale and for the development of housing. So, and you can see that the work that's being done on 24th Street or whatever it is from Walmart past Taco Bell, and there's been a great deal of work out there beginning to clear out that land. I know that there's land that's owned by Ottawa Family Physicians out there that is available for sale for development. There's a lot of things out there. It will be available depending on how much we would have to spend to get there, which brings up Lydia's point that this one doesn't cost us any money if we're sitting on it. The question is, do we need to sit on it, or do we need to just move forward?
Let's find the answer to that. Would somebody like to make a motion? Oh, sorry,
I think
Susan, go ahead.
I was just going to say, from my standpoint, we are about educating kids, and so if we can get them the same education without being landowners, then that's fine. But otherwise, if we can't get them the same experience without being landowners and having us put our own house on the site, then I'd say we should at least see if we can hang on to it and develop a program. But if we can get them experience with Lloyd Builders, or we can get them experience with Waymeyer or somebody like that, I don't know, or these people who are building on our lot, on the old Lincoln lot, then we should try that.
I know that when we had the initial discussion with Heartland, they were open to our students being on site with them and learning processes. Certainly there's a lot of liability things that we would need to work through with that, but if they were open to the conversation at that point, I think they would still be open to the conversation. I think other entities would be open as well. Lloyd Builders is a little bit different, but I think Susan brings up a good point, is that not everything with construction has to be home construction. And we could really look at commercial construction and providing other opportunities for students there as well.
One last question. I believe all those Heartland homes are rentals. Is that right?
I think so,
There's
yes.
nothing really for sale to be a homeowner. So I think that's something else to think about.
Yep.
I don't know if you want a single-family residence by the other rentals. You know,
Yeah.
So I think if we were going to look at this as an investment, one thing you would consider is, would you put a single-family resident in that neighborhood? Does it kind of fit, or should it all be rentals? So,
Yeah, I mean, at that point in time, you'd want to discuss as to whether or not you could build a house and then sell to the group that was renting the other properties, because it would be pretty difficult, I think, to sell a home next to
yeah.
those things, I think is what Harold is getting at.
Would somebody like to make a motion one way or the other about this Lincoln lot?
So with that said, Madam President, I'll make a motion that we go ahead and sell the lots at Heartland.
I will second that motion.
All right, so it's been moved by Harold Wingert and seconded by Linda Alderman that we sell the Lincoln lots to Heartland. We'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. Linda Alderman,
Yes.
Julie Dandrio, yes. Susan Moore,
Yes.
Shanda Olmsted,
Yes.
Lydia Payne,
No.
Harold Wingert,
Yes.
and that passes 5-1.
I'll reach out to Kyle Thurman tomorrow and start dealing with the paperwork. I would imagine there'll be some contract that we need to bring back to the board to approve at some point in time, and we'll go from there.
And just a reminder, we did not just vote against a construction program. We just voted on selling the lots. All right.
Okay.
All right, we are down to section 5.02. It's always great to have Mrs. Bybee here, and she is going to present information regarding the fall map data.
Yes, so first of all, I want to thank our teachers, our administrators, and our families for getting our remote learners in to be able to take this, get the map testing. It was quite logistically something that our schools all worked through, and our counselors worked tirelessly to do that, but I appreciate the families being able to also bring their kids in to be able to get these, because really this really helps us to see, with the amount of time that our kids were away from school, it helps us to see where our kids are coming in at this year and where we're starting with this year. So a couple of things that I wanted to also note that I saw as proctoring a couple of the tests with middle and high kids is how much you can tell that our teachers have really, the past few years, been putting a lot of value to these tests, because the kids really were interested to know how did they do. They took their time. MAP has added something that's called rapid guessing, and I in all of the amount of tests that I proctored, only had one kiddo who got the rapid guessing. Hold on, slow down. So the kids know that, okay, that is a feature, so I might as well take my time and do my best. So that's good to see, because that shows that the attention that our teachers are giving to it with our kids, really putting the value into it, where our scores are showing that. So our scores look actually not too bad, but I do want to point out that NWEA updated their norms, so we have new norms this year. So what they have done is they take tests from over the past few years to be able to update those norms, and it's updated across the United States. So in that, they actually have talked about, they've narrowed that range. So you're going to see, you may see some kids who typically would test very high, maybe not quite test as high as what they would normally have done. And then those kids who maybe had tested much lower might look like they're testing a little bit better. So we're going with obviously the 2020 norms. They've also put some changes in for our K. If you remember, the first, so K1, we don't give it to kindergarten, but NWA has it for kindergarten. Between first and second grade, there's usually quite a dip, because the test is read to our first graders, and then in second grade, they need to do all of the reading themselves. So that's when you see a lot of times a dip in those scores. So what they're doing, our first grade looks significantly higher, especially after just looking at our FastBridge, didn't look so great for first grade. But the overall, this is, remember, an overall reading score, not the specific skills that FastBridge gives us. But what they're doing is they're trying to they made some changes to how the test is scored, so that we shouldn't see that as large of a dip in second grade. It will be a little bit more aligned with the overall comprehensive scores for reading. So just as a reminder, the blue is what we would want to see the most of. Those are the kids that score scored in average or above, this is the percentage of kids who scored in the average or above categories. The red is low average and the yellow is low. So we obviously want to see less of the yellow, more of the blue. So, which we actually, when we look at in the next couple of slides, you'll be able to see that when we're looking at cohorts, where we want to try to get our kids at 80% of our kids at that average or above, we're really not starting off in a too bad of a spot. It's about, let's keep that momentum going with our kids. So this is reading.
So one of the things before we switch to the next slide, if you look, you can kind of begin to see there's a trend line that occurs. And again, first grade, remember, we didn't assess first grade until starting last year.
Right.
And so prior to that, we kind of said that the scores don't mean as much because they don't necessarily tell us the same thing when they begin to at second grade. But you can see that that trend line kind of comes up, and it's a pretty steady growth model there. Again, Amy said it, we want to get our kids to 80% would be the MTSS model. 80% of our kids should be in a particular area. You're going to have 15% that need some intervention and 5% that are going to need larger areas of intervention. But what we begin to see is that we have pretty steady growth, and then about the 5th grade, we level up. Which would indicate to me that these kids are retaining their growth or making their growth per year, but not necessarily closing the gap, right? So we know that there are two different models that we start to look at. One is what is the learning gap between where they're at and where they should be, and the other is how do we move beyond where they should be to get ourselves over the top. So really starting in the 5th grade, we get consistent learning across the board, which is something that we should celebrate, but we've got to figure out how to break out of that and get our kids above and begin to break the mold of consistency.
So then, Dean, can you move to, well, or just move to the, go back to the math. There's math. So math actually looks a little bit lower when you look at the amount of blue that there is, but similar to what Dr. Cobbs was just saying, there's kind of well, this one actually dips down in 4th grade, and then you kind of have more of a straight line across 5th, and then 6th, 7th, and 8th, a little bit of movement, but not a whole lot. So again, that's where we can look at, okay, where are our kids? What are the things that we're doing for interventions or within our classrooms? Math especially, when you think about the amount of skills that build on each other, this isn't terribly surprising when we've been off as much as we have, but it's frustrating for our teachers that have been, that we know we had some teachers that worked very well, especially in math, to be able to try to do as much as they can with our kids in a remote fashion. But we know that getting the kids back in school is definitely going to help with those math concepts. Anything else here on this one that you wanted to? Okay. Yes.
I'm sorry, I just had a quick question. I wanted to clarify, you had said percent, but those are percentiles, right?
Percent, yeah, no, it's a percent of students who scored in
The percent of students.
Right.
They are not this percentile.
Not percentile.
ranks. Okay, but the blue colors are percentiles.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
the percent of students who scored in the average or above. They scored average or above on MAP.
Okay.
Okay, I had a question. You said in reading, the 2nd grade went down because they had to read it by themselves. So what was the decline in 2nd grade for math? What would have caused that?
Well, honestly, I think 2nd grade across the board went much lower, and there is still some reading that goes along also with math. It's not read to them. And it is definitely more, when you move into the 2nd through 5th grade growth test, there's a lot more problem solving that happens versus more of the foundational skills that
Okay.
they would see in 1st grade.
Explain what, go backwards 2 questions to what you answered to Julie, because you lost me, which is not easy, not hard to do. I read across here, and what I was looking at is 41% tile is the blue, right?
No, it's the
Explain.
percent of students. So out of 100 students,
Right.
it's the percent of students that scored in the average or above.
Yeah. And Harold, you're right. Average or above is 41st percentile or above.
Right, yes,
So students scoring in the 41st percentile up to the 100th percentile are listed as blue. on
as
here.
blue, right. Yes, that is correct. And then it's the oh gosh, I don't have that off the, yeah, so right up above there is 21st percentile, and below is the yellow.
Right. And so then if we come down to, and you're getting to this a little bit, but you're coming down and you show us the numbers. And I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, so you're up in the chart, you're saying that this is how many of our kids scored in 41 percentile or above, right?
Right, yes.
Okay. So, but do we ever really know what our kids, is there anything in here that we know what they actually scored? Because I'm
They
thinking
get,
that-
they get what's called a RIT score.
Okay.
And they have, so there is, yes, another report, which really the teachers use that report. So they will get a RIT score, and within that RIT, there will have what's called a RIT band, so that on any given day, a kiddo who, say, scored 217 as
Right.
their RIT score would score in this range. And then what they can do is they can look at, with that RIT score, they can drill down into what they have is called a learning continuum.
Right.
And they can see what are the skills that kids who score in, with this RIT score, what they typically know and what they typically maybe still need to work on.
It will also identify their percentile to them as well. So they're in the 77th percentile or 80th percentile based upon their RIT score.
For me personally, and I'm not speaking for the rest of the board, okay, it would be helpful to translate this into numbers, because,
Like number of students.
well, number of students and what are we, because when you tell me that 50%, I'm just picking a number, here is second grade Lincoln falls below 50%. I'm just throwing a number out.
Right.
Doesn't matter. We could pick a different grade, different whatever, okay? So 41% doesn't seem like a very high bar to me. And I don't know how I put that into comparison of the real world. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is
We need smaller breakdowns.
how do we know what our students really, I mean, what I'm trying to figure out is, if, to go back to your 217,
Right.
I think that's a better number personally, because I think then, just like the teachers know how to put their hands around it, I think we understand that better than just saying that, you know, we're at 41 percentile. And then the second of all, you talk about strategies of moving out. I actually think there's 3 strategies. How do you take the upper echelon that are scoring really well and move them up? And are we moving them up? How do you take the lower echelon and move them up? And what are we doing about the middle? You know what I mean? So 2 things I think would be helpful. One is breaking this into actually numbers rather than just percentiles might be helpful. And then, you know, what strategies are we applying that helps us move the whole, you know, because it seems like to me it wouldn't be the same strategy that you would do to each group, right? Does that make sense?
Right, so how this data is used, well, first of all, let me go to the numbers.
Okay.
I will tell you that anytime we have used, like with our student improvement teams, when you talk in a RIT band, because that's really hard to understand, most of the time percentile is easier for everybody to understand. So if you say a student scored 217, and it depends on the grade that they're in, then we have to get the chart out that shows, okay, so what does that number, where does that fall as far as what's the norm of that grade level? Or what's the norm, you know, is it below or above? So it actually is a typically quicker an understanding if you're using percentiles, because you know that 50th percentile is that average range according to NWEA. And then they also make that a range because, again, they want you to make sure you understand that on any given day, they give their score, students' results in a range. So they'll get a RIT score, but they have it within a range. And their percentile then is why they have that 41st percentile. So we obviously want all of our kids at 50th and above. We don't, those kids who are in the 41st or the 50th percentile, we really want to watch those kids because we know they're according to NWEA on the average, but we know they're really close to dropping down to that low average range. So, and then as far as how this data is used, so that's where we have like the actions, the tier, the advisory. This is one piece of data. In elementary, they use 3 pieces of data. They use FastBridge, they use MAP, they use the learning continuum that I was talking about that goes into those specific strategies or standards that they skills that students would be able to do at their specific RIT band. And then they can also use whatever the tests that they have, common assessments that they have within their classroom. At the middle and high level, they're going to use their MAP results to then, and FastBridge to determine which kids need intervention. And what specific skills do we need to be able to focus on during that intervention time. So I guess I'm wondering what you're wanting to see that would help you better, to understand this better. Is it that specifically what's our process that we use this data for?
Well,
Possibly?
it's two things. One is, back in the day, okay, just a couple of years ago, we always looked at numbers. And then we recently switched over to charts. And I don't know that I made that leap, okay? So I'm still in my head thinking numbers and how close we were to everybody else. And then second of all, and Dr. Cobbs knows this, I'm not a big fan of advisory or tier. I don't know that those are terms that really I put value in, because I don't know that we're achieving in those two. So yes, I think the last step that you were talking about is, I do like to know what teachers, I think they are using them. I just like to know how,
An example of a process that they've gone
that
through.
each, elementary OMS and OHS would use, because I think there's where we're going to get the most out of it. I don't know that tier advisory is where it's being done at, you know what I mean? But when you say that teachers are using the information, I think that's a great deal that, how are we analyzing this? And I understand we are, I just don't know how we are. Does that make sense? And so I think two things would just be nice to have the numbers and see where we're at. And then two is, like you said, a little bit more on examples how teachers are using them in the various buildings.
Okay, and I can certainly do that. And I don't know if if you want to scroll up to the next, if this helps at all. But this is the reading cohort. So again, I know we're still looking at average and above, low average and low percent of kids who scored at that percentile. But you can kind of see where our kids have moved from last winter, when we last took this test, to this fall. The ones that are in gray, our 6th, our 10th, our 11th grade kids did not take, that wasn't a winter score, because they didn't do winter. So that was fall. So you can see that we've made, the green is obviously a positive change, which is what we would want to see, is that those kids have made a positive move. Some of them, there was a significant positive movement. The lower grade, you're going to see a larger, typically, a larger positive movement, because as they get up into the higher RITs scores, it's harder to move a significant amount of RIT numbers. No change is one color, and then any concerns that we would be wanting to look at. And so our 2nd grade obviously is the concern, where we want to make sure that we're paying attention to our 1st and our 2nd grade. And I know a lot of our principals and our teachers have talked about how do we possibly shift our support to 1st and 2nd grade this first semester, as much support as possible, for instance, with our title teachers, and any other support that we have. Do we need to add more time with our 1st and 2nd grade kids to be able to help make sure that the foundation skills are being built up? So that's one of the specifics that we're doing with that.
Okay.
And then you can see math, that same type of comparison. And that helps us to see how the kids themselves are moving and growing. And then the last slide shows how the data kind of helps to show closing the gap. So what you're looking at here is one of the numbers that we also get is the students who have scored at or above the norm RIT. And that's that number. This is the percent of kids who scored at that RIT, that norm grade level RIT, that is across the United States. Then the mean RIT difference is, how did our kids score? What was our mean RIT score? And how did that compare to the national norm RIT? And so obviously we want it to be right on or negative, because that means that we're above that norm RIT. So reading, again, has some the green, it means we're in a positive movement. So we're in a good place right now to at least start. and continue with the work that we're doing to try to keep that gap closing. There's a few areas that aren't looking great and that we really need to address those. Any questions with those?
I have
Yes.
one last, and this back to the numbers days, okay? If I recall right, and maybe Dr. Cobbs can help, but it seems like to me we've, as a district, even for 5 to 10 years, whereas we start low in second grade, we're really closing that gap by the time we get to 5th and 6th grade. Is that still the trend? I mean, in other words, when I used to see the numbers, we'd be we'd be below what I call the norms. But by the time you get to that 5th or 6th grade, you're really getting really close. Is that still?
And I think I can answer this. So because of that, and it was a part of what we did with redesign, we really began to impact what we were trying to do at pre-K in terms of preparing kids for school. If you look at what our FastBridge assessments would tell us, our students have never been lower in terms of identified at-risk students coming into kindergarten, and we see huge gaps at first grade because we saw a lack of time within our schools. So what we're seeing now is that our kids are coming to us more prepared than they've ever been.
Okay.
So we better start seeing, if we're doing things right, a gradual increase from there on up, right?
Okay.
Not huge groups and then plateauing off. We should see gradual increases all the way across for what we want to see. Now, if we could have done what we should have done last year without COVID-19, we would have expected to see some of that last year, because that was the first year that we initially saw some of that, those
beginning of the
lower
year.
numbers of at-risk students at the kindergarten level based upon pre-K programming. But with COVID hitting and missing out on 7 weeks of instruction, and we've all seen what that's happened, we see this huge dip, and we can see it there. So we can't correlate numbers based upon what was not taught to our kids. But what we should get as we move kids back into a full-time, and we've really only missed 7 weeks, 6 weeks of instruction of about half of the time. There's a huge gap that's going to exist there. But over the course of the next 25 weeks or whatever is left in the school year, we should see substantial growth of those kids moving forward. It's probably going to take us a year or two to catch back up in that cycle, but we should see it. We better see it. The expectation is that we're going to see it.
Right.
And that'll be the piece that we have to continue to work for to ensure.
The other
That
thing
was-
that goes, oh, I'm sorry.
No, and that was my next point, is if you looked at those numbers we used to look at, you would see the fall to spring, you really did see pretty much, there was a couple times where the jump wasn't, but you did see, and then you saw that summer dip, and then you saw this jump back up. So what it was saying to me was that we were doing an excellent job throughout the year of educating. Yes, we had a summer slip. So that's just, when I look at the numbers, it's helpful to see those numbers versus this chart.
And what we were seeing there, and this chart here does a great job of indicating how far we've come from those days, is that we would see this chart in reading and math. That when we look at that line, yes, we would see steady growth. We would see our kids meeting their annual growth without closing the gap. And so we would see a steady increase of growth, but we would still see a gap between where they were at and the norm. Where we're getting is what we're seeing over here, which is where we're beginning to surpass the norm.
Right.
Our kids are getting to where they need to be, and we're moving beyond the average student. That has been the expectation all along.
Correct.
All of the work that we've done from a curricular standpoint, from documenting the curriculum to scope and sequence to intervention to curricular resources, which we'll talk about here, to the intervention that we've put in place. Those things are beginning to impact us in a positive manner. The big issue is we got to make sure that we address it here. Those lower levels that you're talking about, we can't continue to have an 8.8 gap and a 6-point gap between where our students are at and the norm.
I think another thing to note too is the last few years, our focus really, I guess the last 3 years since I came, we had a lot of conversations, and our teachers are really embracing this, that it used to be that there was too many people thinking that interventions happened outside of the classroom. And whether it was kids who receive special ed services or kids who receive title services in the elementary levels. And now teachers understand that interventions happen whether it's in the classroom or whether it's not necessarily just, an intervention isn't provided by somebody outside of the classroom. Interventions happen with our classroom teachers and with added support staff. And that has really become more of our culture. So then our kids are truly getting more interventions, whether it's tier 2 within their classroom or tier 2 and tier 3 outside of the classroom. So if that makes sense, there's been definitely, our teachers are embracing that, and it's the village that is working to be able to help to close that gap versus just 1 or 2 people being responsible for that.
I had a couple questions. First of all, what does RIT stand for? What are those letters? RIT, what does that stand for?
Oh, I will have to find out. I don't know. I've honestly only used the term RIT.
Okay. And then, so I think I'm still a little confused, like the others had mentioned. So, like, if you take, for example, 3rd grade at Lincoln, how can there be a green and a red? How can,
So under math,
yeah. How can you have,
so green meaning that those kids made a positive movement. So we had more kids move into the average and above this fall from
Right.
where they scored in the winter.
but you,
We had a lot more kids move into that low average. So while I could have just not even put a color in the low average because we had a lot of kids move from, probably, those kids moved from their low winter. So if you see 3G, in the winter, there were 32 or 29% of those kids in the low, and now there's only 17%. So there was a positive movement that way. So the low was positive movement, and so the low average, probably those kids moved up into the low average range. That's why we have so many kids in the low average. Does that make sense? So I probably could have just kept the colors out of that middle section, because some of the kids, if it was red in the average and above, they would have possibly moved down to the low average, or that could have been kids moving up. But it's still something we would need to look at. Why are there 29% of those kids in that low
so I think this
average?
would be an example of how if we had more numbers, like they were saying, it would be an actual clear picture, because you can't really see where the numbers, I just think it's kind of confusing as well. But then my other question, and I would never want to put words in someone else's mouth, so this is just from what I'm seeing, is the blue, like 41, the 41st percentile to the 100th percentile, that is a huge distance. So like me as a parent, if I see, oh, look, this is great, but then I'm like, wait a second, they're in the 41st percentile, and I'm thinking,
So we can
there's a lot of
split those up
difference.
into 3. The reports that we get are actually in 3 different areas. You have average, you have above average, and you have high. So you have 3, that above, average or above really has 3 different percents that we could be looking at.
okay, I think that,
I'm just trying to consolidate it for our purposes of, we want the majority of our kids in that average or above percent.
I think
As a
it's
district.
important to recognize there as well that we get hung up on percentiles because we live in a 100% system. And we think that the 41st percentile is a failure rate because that's the system that we use at 41st percent. Remember that these are normed national tests. So these students are at average or above in the 41st percentile. These are not numbers that we provide, right? It's not like, hey, let's set this arbitrary number. They're indicating that a student at the 41st percentile has all the necessary skills to be successful at that level and beyond. So even though we would indicate as, whoa, that's low, that's the lower half of all students, still in the grand schemes of what people should be learning and the skills that they have accessible to them, they are average and above at their particular grade level. And that is important for us to understand and not compare what we believe to be a low percentile as evidence of poor skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
Or grading system.
So
It's not a grading
would this
system.
be the same as at our parent-teacher conferences when there was the black line moving along and they were like, this would be the norm and then the dotted was my child, you know? Because, so it would be that?
Yes, yeah.
Because so for one of the classes, the teacher, like my daughter, was 2 above the black line. And her teacher said that was a concern. Because
Was it the Fast Bridge or was it MAP? Because both of those have that same type of thing where you have, so again, it's data, and data's different based on what you're looking at. Fast Bridge, if you're being progress monitored for something, it's going to have that same line, and if you want to actually have 6 data points above the line if you're going to move on to something, the next skill. That's progress monitoring. That may not be a growth. If you're looking at growth, if it was MAP on a student profile, you would have the black line, and then you can see where, and they have a color, like a color scheme, where if you are above that line, you can see how far above, or if they're above the line, they're probably okay, as if it was MAP.
Yeah.
They should be.
It may also be indicative, and depending on what your teacher told you, you should have seen the points of the other assessments along that line. So if your previous winter score, because we didn't do spring, was here and there was actual a declination, even though you're still above the line, that would probably be something that we as teachers would talk about as a concern. Why did we see the decline? We need to make sure that we stop the decline and turn it in the other direction. So depending on where the other points fell within your model, that would be a part of the conversation that we would want to be aware of.
Okay.
But being above the black line typically is a good thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Very good.
That's
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Yep.
And we are going to move on. Mrs. Bybee, stay right there. I think Mrs. Spanning is joining you for this next part for the curriculum update.
Yes, and so these are highlights of the new materials that we have purchased. So it's really not all curriculum highlights, it's just of those materials that we purchased new this year. And I'm going to let Mrs. Spanning start with early childhood.
Thanks.
Okay, so as you know, in early childhood, last year, we already had previously been using creative curriculum, but we readopted, and you'll see that there are little unit guides up there at the top. Those are new ones that the teachers got this year. So they got signs, insects, sand, tubes and tunnels, and simple machines, and they were super excited. Our teachers have a 6-week, beginning of year unit that they do every year to establish routines and things. And starting about a week or so ago, they started using their new units. They're very excited. So we're starting insects, and another one's doing tubes and tunnels. But as we went through creative curriculum last year, if you recall, we went through and looked at the standards for pre-K, and we identified what's covered in creative curriculum and what is not. And we had just a few standards that were not covered. And so this year we will spend time going back and seeing how we can address those standards. The other thing with creative curriculum, we had the opportunity with COVID-19 coming in to provide a remote environment for some of our pre-K kids. I think we had 18 at the start of the school year for remote, and it was a lot easier to purchase Creative Curriculum Cloud. It's pretty fabulous. They have taken the lessons and they have broke them down into very simple 3 to 5 step directions for parents and made them so they can use things in their home. So, something that we might have access to, they may not in their homes. So they have made that very friendly, and teachers can push that out. We did decide, they offered us a really good rate to extend that for a year with the unknowns of COVID. We did purchase the cloud for them for each building. One for each building just in case we're in a similar situation next year. But even if we're not, it has some really awesome features that they still can push out to parents. And then we also have been doing letters training, And I know that Mrs. Bybee probably has spoke to you about it before, and if not, it will be coming up. But they have an early childhood portion, and the letters training, and I put what it stands for up there, Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling. With the science of reading coming in this year, we really felt like it was important to beef our teachers up. So going back to that data piece that we were just talking about, really making sure that at early grades, we have literacy foundations. And that's really what letters training has done. This mask is killing me. Okay, so myself and Ashley Gillespie have gone through, and we are now certified, which feels good, because it's not an easy training. It is rigorous, not as much at the early childhood as it is for letters for the older grades, but it's still rigorous. And so on this Friday, we will start training our teachers. So we will sit down with our early childhood teachers and really start going through foundations of oral language, foundations of written language, and really focus on that throughout the year, as well as we will have to do the science of reading training as required by the state. So we will be doing both of those pieces. Something else we purchased this year is called My IGDs. And again, I put the label in there for you. It is an early numeracy and literacy screener. So much like our K through 12 kids have FastBridge, now our pre-K has an option for screening as well, which will help us as an admin team. It will help pre-K teachers to really identify what skills we need to focus on in foundations of reading, what skills students are not getting, how do we provide intervention for that. And so My IGDs is something that we have started to utilize. We'll start looking at the data on Friday, so we're excited to do that. We've not used it yet. And then the last piece for early childhood is a piece that we ordered, I don't know, probably mid-year last year, and we ordered it for more than pre-K, but our pre-K does have a piece of that, and really to raise that phonemic awareness piece. So it goes along with that literacy foundation, and making sure that we have all the pieces in place. One of the things that we found is creative curriculum lacks that just a little bit, and we wanted to beef it up. Questions about early childhood? Okay, well, as Amy goes through, if you have questions, let me know.
Thank you for sharing that information, Mrs. Fanning.
So a lot of that goes along with the reading initiative, the Kansas State Reading Initiative, the dyslexia recommendations. So making sure that we also have those things addressed in pre-K will be super important for our students, and making sure that their readiness skills are there as they move into kindergarten. So this Lexia Core 5 is all of these are the instructional software pieces that we have added from this beginning of this year, or extended it if it was something that we already had. So Lexia Core 5, I'm super excited about this, and so far the teachers that have started using it are already seeing good progress with their kids. But we purchased this for our K2 students, all of our K2 students, and our third through fifth grade SPED students, and this is a new purchase this year. The reason we only did that amount is it's very pricey, so we wanted to make sure that we are getting the best bang for our buck, if you will, that we are, number one, making sure that the usage is there. I worry sometimes that we have so many things out there for teachers to use that then they just pick and choose, and then we're not really we're not being as fiscally responsible as we could by ensuring that we're using across the board and using it more systematically. So we're really trying to do that with these things that we purchased this year. So the recommended usage for this is as a core supplement. The teachers will receive the K2 teachers have already had professional development on how to get it started. Kim Randall has been doing a great job trying to get everything set up with all of these new technologies, instructional software pieces, and this one has been the most difficult, not because of Kim, but because of Lexia and getting it synced with Clever. So some of our teachers are just starting with it. Others who went ahead and set it up are using it, like when they do guided reading time or small group time, this would be what kids could be working on independently, in addition to working on at home. So kids do it's an adaptive placement test that they take at the beginning, and then it recommends, based on where kids score, how many minutes they should be using or being on Lexia over the course of a week. So we want our parents to know that this is a great resource for their kids to be working on at home, in addition to them using it at school. And it covers 6 areas of reading instruction, which goes right along with what the reading initiative would expect us to have in our reading instruction. The one piece that was very different than a lot of other instructional software is it does a great job with phonological awareness. And there's a lot of them. They think they're phonemic awareness, but in reality, they're phonics. So the phonemic awareness is so important for developing that foundation of reading for our kids. So it is aligned with our Kansas standards. So we're super excited about getting this even started even more. So Lori Skeet has been doing a great job with hers in her classroom. We're going to use hers her classroom as an example this on the 30th, because the teachers will be learning how to use the data from it to be able to help increase that usage. So I appreciate Lori for allowing us to use her data. Any questions on this one?
And is there a way for you, like oversight, to see if this is actually being used for
Yes.
all the kids?
Yes, and the instructional coaches, Brad Carlson and Cara Day and myself are monitoring that so that we can see. So Mr. Carlson has already gone and talked with those teachers that hadn't gotten started. A lot of them didn't get started because they were waiting for Clever to get synced with it at this point. But yes, we will be able to monitor how much usage is happening and the changes that we see in the kids' growth.
For those of you that don't know what Clever is, it's a badge synchronous
Oh.
system so that kids can log onto their computer solely with a badge and they don't actually have to
Single
type in their
sign-on.
stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
And then, so you mentioned parents could use it at home. In order for the parents to have the kids log in and use it, will they have already had to do the
Placement test?
the placement test that you
Yes.
mentioned that?
Yes.
So have all the students done the placement tests?
Almost. Like I said, there's just a few that hadn't started it yet. And so that will be, the part of that October 30th will be, let's look at data and let's make sure you get your kids on.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about Lexia? IXL we had for math, all the way through, actually we had for math for all grades except for K1. And so we added the ELA portion of it this year. And for 2 through 5, and then we have math for 6 through 8 and Algebra 1, and then our SPED kids, 6 through 12, have both ELA and math. And the reason we didn't do ELA for 6 through 12 for all kids is because we had a better option than what IXL was, and the teachers were not using it when they had access to it. So IXL really is the 2 ways that you can use it. There can be a learning path where the kids do take like a diagnostic or a placement test, and then it recommends where kids should go and what skills they need to be using to be able to close that gap. Or teachers, and this is how most teachers use it, is it kind of parallels their math instruction. So it's paralleled with My Math. So if they've worked on a certain lesson with My Math, they can assign an IXL assignment that would go along with that content that they were working on. So, and I know that middle and high also use it mostly that way, where it's paralleled with, it's connected to those math resources. So IXL is connected with My Math, Illustrative Math, CPM resources, and ACT Prep for ELA and math. So there's lots of different ways you can use IXL. And on October 30th, our elementary, our middle and high really are, they use it quite a bit and know how to use it. Our middle and high, our elementary, their professional development for 3 through 5, while our K2 are receiving Lexia, they will also be receiving some professional development on how to use the analytics and to be able to use that student data. And we have a couple of what I would call expert teachers in each one of our buildings that will be able to also help with, that are using it very well. So any questions about IXL? Okay, so then Happy Numbers is the new one that we purchased for pre-K 2. And this, again, is one that our 3 through 5 have access to it, but most of them are using the IXL. But we're encouraging 3 through 5, third through 5th grade to be able to use it for those kids who really have quite a bit of holes in math, because this will, again, they'll take a placement test. This will take them from where the holes are, or where the path that they need to be on, to be able to close some of those holes with their skills and concepts, and it's a progression. And it also starts at the conceptual level, and then offers them feedback if kids miss things, and will take away some of the distractions to be able to do more direct instruction for their intervention. So it really has proven itself already. We've seen some good growth in the teachers that are using it, and most all of our teachers, I think, in Happy Numbers have gotten started with that. But our instructional coaches are also, they've developed a Google Classroom for reading and a Google Classroom for math for our teachers, and so they are putting a lot of information in there for them to make sure that they have what they need to get going with this. And then also a lot of one-on-one helping teachers. Any questions about Happy Numbers?
I just had one. I was actually confused on the IXL. I'm one with Happy Numbers. If you need any input, I am one with Happy Numbers
Okay.
after my homeschooling now here. So IXL, you have 2nd grade listed there, and Happy Numbers has 2nd grade.
Right.
So are
They have both.
Are they supposed to be using both, or?
What I've instructed to them is I would prefer that they use Happy Numbers this first semester to build those skills that they need, and then move to IXL. But if they want to use both, they're certainly willing or happy to use both. And some are using both.
Very good, thank you.
And, okay, and then what I talked about why we didn't get IXL ELA is because we have Newsella. You'll hear it both ways for 6 through 12. And this is if you want to ever just take a time to look into it, it's really, you can get on and just look at, they'll actually have, like, I think, sample articles. But what this is this is nonfiction reading for our 6th through 12th graders. All of our ELA teachers are using it, but all teachers have access to it. So I know I checked in with middle school, and we have some social studies, some science teachers using it. We have our gifted teachers using it, 612. What they're able to do is they're able to, whatever content they're teaching at the time, they can find a nonfiction article that goes along with that, be able to assign that to the kids. That article can be assigned in 5 different Lexile levels. A Lexile level is a level of reading. So MAP would and FastBridge both will correlate however they score, they can correlate it to a Lexile level. And so if a kiddo is at maybe not reading on grade level, the teacher can assign that exact same article that has been written in 5 different levels. So they can get closer to their actual reading level, which really helps with less frustration on the kids' part, while still being able to get the information that they need from that article. So teachers are using, there's quizzes that go along with those, there's power words, so there's a lot of vocabulary, there's writing assignments and writing prompts that teachers are using to be able to really extend this resource. And then in November, during one of their PLCs, we'll be doing some professional development with those teachers to ensure that for them to actually share with each other, how are you using it? What's the data that you can gain from it? What are you seeing, especially like our other cross-content areas? How are they using it so we can encourage more use? Any questions about this one? And then text help is a feature that actually was purchased through our SPED program and purchased specifically for our kids who receive services. But we were able to, Mr. Robinson was able to purchase this for our entire district, which this is another, also an amazing feature. It essentially, actually, there's so much that it actually offers that it's hard to even just put it into one slide. But it allows, it can speak for our English language learners. You can put a, it can take a text from anything that they found on, that the teacher has assigned to them, and that can read to them in specific languages. They can do annotations. It helps them to walk through annotations. They can do highlighting. It will read text aloud to them. If they just highlight over certain words, it can read that text aloud to them. It has text and picture dictionaries. If they highlight a word, it can show them what that word means, and they can also use pictures, which is helpful for those kids who struggle with reading, or for our English language learners to be able to really make that connection between the vocabulary and what they're seeing. So it also, there's research tools, it helps them proof their written work. They can actually speak what they want to say, and it will type it for them. It's just a super great tool that typically for kids who struggle, you might need to have an adult or a peer partner with someone to help them if they're struggling with some of the reading or the writing, and this is a tool that they can be able to access either at school or at home. So we're super excited about this one too, and Mr. Robinson has scheduled a professional development both for secondary and for elementary on October 30th, but it will be recorded, so if there are teachers that miss it for whatever reason, we'll be able to continue with that, or they'll be able to watch it when it works best for them. We already have a couple of experts within our buildings, and so we're excited about this piece too. Anything else that I missed on that piece?
This is amazing. It's almost prophetic. We had several decades ago a speech language path that said, don't worry about it. They pretty soon, they don't have to learn to read. Someone will read it for them.
Right.
I mean, this is exactly what she was talking about.
Right.
It's amazing.
And really, actually, and I was reading on that too, is it's, a teacher might think, or a person might think, oh gosh, well, it's doing everything for them, but it's really not. What it's doing is it's helping them get to the content of it versus struggling with the decoding of what if they're trying to read, or they're a slow reader, or it's really getting them to be able to have that ability to access the content and to be able to show maybe what's in there. So much that happens a lot of times with processing too, where they have it up here, but they just don't know how to get it onto paper. So this is right.
It's a support, right?
It's a support, right. So super excited about that. And then our curriculum adoption schedule for this year, it's like, holy cow, it's already almost November, and so I already feel like we're late getting started with this. But honestly, it was one of those things where we just could not pull, I didn't feel like we could pull our teachers together to start thinking about curriculum adoption. They needed to be able to get our year started first. But right now, our content areas for review for this year are social studies, ELL, handwriting. We have some, obviously, we need to finalize math. We'll let personal finance, business finance, and marketing also, we'll have them take a look at their standards and their curriculum to see where we're at with that. Again, doesn't mean necessarily that we have to purchase new materials, but just what are they using, and what does their curriculum look like at this point. The arts, I'm trying to get clarification about if the state new standards were slated to come out this winter, but when I questioned the gal at the state, she was seemed confused. So I'm getting clarification on that. If new standards are coming out, we will hold off possibly on the arts until we know that the new standards are coming out. There's no sense in starting that until we know that where the new standards will be, or if they will be introduced. And so then my plan is in November, we'll meet with our Curriculum Advisory Council. Last year, they talked about maybe organizing our Curriculum Advisory Council a little differently, bringing in more people from those areas that we are up for a curriculum adoption, so we ensure that we have people that will be helpful on our Curriculum Advisory Council with their knowledge base. So we need to meet to be able to talk through those things. And then, of course, develop cadres for each of those areas. Any questions on that?
I don't have any questions. I have a comment and then maybe a second comment. But when I compared previous, your score map deal and this, and I asked a question about how are we utilizing, I was kind of tying this into that because I do think it's great that we have multiple tools that teachers can pull upon if we use FastBridge and MAP and we see you have areas of need, that they can, pull from some of these options. The other thing is, you said that you guys were going to look and see how much teachers were using that. For me, I'm not real big on analyzing how much you used and how much you used as much as you're using something. Does that make sense? So I think it's great that we have many options, okay? And that as long as teachers are utilizing what their students need, I think that's great. And so some teachers, I'll pick on mountain math. Some teachers may like mountain math, some may like happy numbers. But as long as they're using something to help, I think that's what's great, is that we give them a lot of quivers in their, a lot of arrows in their quivers to pull something out and say, hey, for this student, this may help. For this student over here, this may help. And I think that's great that you're giving them a lot of options to look at.
Well, and I will clarify too, because this is a message that on October 30th, we will make sure that our teachers understand, is that when we look at usage, it's not a gotcha kind of a thing.
Right.
It's not, we're not looking at it to try to say, oh, you haven't been on. It's so that we can say, our instructional coaches can say, hey, I've noticed you don't have your kids on. Is there something I can do to help you with that? That's the purpose of that. And if we're going to purchase something, we need to make sure we're using it systematically and that we just don't have, that's what we've had in the past, is we've had pockets. For math, we had some using IXL, we had some using MobiMax, we had some using SumDog, we had some, it's very hard to see whether something is valuable if we're not using it in a systematic fashion. Doesn't mean you couldn't use something else in addition if you did IXL and happy numbers. But it is important for us to do systematically. But if there's some other strategy that they're using in place of it, we just have that conversation so that we can understand if your scores are showing that your kids are really growing strong and you're not using IXL, let's say, what are you doing so that we can make sure that we have an understanding of that.
Correct.
So.
Well, and I would just piggyback off that I think it's great how you said, some of these things were, the teachers could be using for the kids while they're working on their groups. We have the Chromebooks now for all the students, so we have these great tools and they're able to use that to keep everyone going while they're working with their independent group. And so I think that's just great.
And then we know it's more purposeful too, what they're doing. Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
Very good.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much
You
for
bet.
coming to present. And I just, real quick, when I first started on the board, I asked the question about curriculum, and this was before you were here, and there was no answer. I mean, there really was not an answer. And so you and those that work with you have just taken this so far, and it's great that we approve these purchases, but then you come back and tell us how they're being used. That's really nice to hear and see. So thank you very much.
Well, and thank you for your support. Thanks.
I think it's important to note the work that Mrs. Fanning and Mrs. Spivey have done. Julie just talked about when she joined the board, curriculum was kind of a word that was kind of up in the air about what we were doing. When we all came to this particular administration, we were tasked with ensuring that we could develop a curriculum, identify what we were going to do, and implement it appropriately in comparison to the numbers that we were seeing and the data that we were being served. I think what you're beginning to see is that we are making true decisions based upon the instructional needs and resources for our students, based upon the data that we see, and the growth is beginning to happen. And that is hugely dependent upon Mrs. Fanning and Mrs. Spivey. Certainly Mr. Robinson, we've seen our special education scores go through the roof. There's been a great deal of work amongst our teachers. They have bought into this notion. It has been an incredible pleasure to work with them and watch the growth of our staff and our students in the process. So thank you to them for all the work that they do.
And I'm just thinking how fabulous all of this is. When I think back to the day when I'm sitting on the floor going through books and running off dittos for various and sundry groups, this is amazing. Yeah, file folder games. This is really, truly amazing.
Wait, did you just use running off ditto? I mean, that's like dating you. I mean,
Yeah.
that's even before fax machines. I just want to go on record. you
But
know.
yeah, I did run off.
Yeah.
But, oh, this is really, really exciting.
Right. Well, thank you again for that update, and we're going to move to the next section, which is an update on our transition to full-time.
Yeah,
And-
I just wanted to make sure that everybody remembered that today was our first day back full-time for elementary students. It went incredibly well. It was in essence the first day of school for kids again, because there was a lot that we were having to deal with. It's the first day for real pickup and drop off. It's the first day for real lunch. It's the first day for recess. It's the first day for transitions. It's the first day for all of those things, and it really went very well at all buildings. The great thing about our administrators and our staff is that they are already reviewing their procedures and looking at how they can change for tomorrow, make sure that we get things tightened down and compressed a little bit to make sure that the pickup lines go a little faster and that lunch goes a little smoother and all of those things. But really great day, and the excitement of our teachers to have our students back for a full day was really on full display today. So we wanted to make sure that we thank our teachers for doing incredible jobs with our kids and taking care of our kids, and for our administrators taking care of our staff, and all of our ancillary groups, maintenance and transportation, everybody, making sure that we could do what we did today, and look forward to this transition happening again next week for the middle school and the following week for the high school. But I did want to, because I said that I would do it at every board meeting moving forward, is I wanted to draw attention to the gating criteria, which continues to remain really in a pretty good spot. So I wanted to identify a couple of things. One, you see the trend rate per 1,000 has dipped way down. So we had our spike at 234.9 per 100,000 inhabitants on September 20th. Here, about a month later, that's dropped all the way back down to 54.8. At 50, it goes back to green. Right, so we're very close there. That's just maybe just a positive case that would result in that number. This number right here is your 2-week percentage, and I wanted to draw attention to it because you can see your previous weeks being in the, actually this one should be yellow, not green, but this one was green. And currently, as of today, it's at 0%. But this number I wanted to draw attention because it spiked pretty high in comparison to what we've seen in the past. But I wanted to take a look here. They tested far fewer folks last week. Now, we did have some positive results, but those positive results have remained pretty steady over the course of the last 3 weeks, but tested a lot fewer people, which is ultimately why you see the percentage higher. I think part of that is because they're making some decisions about testing whole groups and saying, look, if you're not symptomatic, don't come in for a test. Quarantine, do what you need to do, where before they were testing everybody that was associated with it. So those that are coming in with symptoms are being tested and they're showing up as positive. That rate has basically stayed the same, but they're not testing near as many people. I do wonder if, because remember, we see these numbers change. Even today, this number changed right here, which is almost, 3 weeks ago. But this number changed as of today. I'm wondering if we will not see more data going to KDHE about the number of assessments that took place last week, and that data just hasn't been reviewed yet. So we'll continue to see, but that's not an awful situation for us on gating criteria. Still predominantly green or yellow, which gives us some latitude to do the things that we need to do. We're certainly not red, which is where we begin to get a little concerned about what we're doing. So gating criteria looks really good for us. And it was a great day for having kids back. Yes.
I just was inquiring about our absenteeism.
Yep.
That hadn't been on there in a while, and I just was inquiring.
Yeah, because it takes an incredible amount of work to try to configure it based upon how we're going to school now. So the reason I haven't put it on there is because the data from our remote kids has to be disaggregated from the data from our in-person kids. and they're all in the same system. So you would have to go through, identify who your remote kids were, pull them out, and get the actual numbers. When I asked Kim to do that several weeks ago when it was at 91%, it took her about 2.5 hours to do it. So I haven't asked her to do it since. Now, we will get to see data differently now that we have most of our students back in school. So we'll start putting our attendance data back up there. We'll certainly see our elementary kids, but we won't have near as many students in offsetting situations. So our attendance data should be a little more clear without having to ask somebody to disaggregate it that way. So that's why it hasn't been up there.
Thank you.
And I do echo positive kudos to the administration, the building principals, teachers, staff at the elementary, because I heard a lot of positive comments today that it went relatively, for the first day back, they were very pleased and relatively how well it went. So I think that's great. Kudos to everybody for all the planning you did.
And it should get easier every day, just like a normal first day of school. We know that pickup and drop-off is going to be a mess. We know the buses are going to be a mess. We know the lunch is going to be a mess. You try to herd really 400 kids to particular places at the beginning of the day, end of the day, and through lunch. It takes an awful lot of logistics to make that happen. So our teachers will get better at it. Our kids will get better at it every day.
Right.
Parents will get better at it every day. So it was a good day.
Very good.
That's all I got.
All right, thank you. We'll move down to personnel report. You've all been presented a personnel report. Would somebody like to make a motion to approve tonight's report?
Madam President, I'll move that we approve the personnel report.
Is there a second?
Second?
It was moved by Harold Wingert and seconded by Linda Alderman that we approve tonight's personnel report. All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 6-0. And we are down to announcements.
So here's some amazing things. First of all, congratulations to the Lady Cyclones volleyball team is going to Lebec County tomorrow for their first state tournament in a few years. So we're excited about them. They have Paola tomorrow night. If they get past Paola, when they get past Paola on Tuesday night, they go to Hutch. And I know that the bracket they're in has either Miege or I can't remember the other team, but Miege is certainly in that side. We played Miege well here. I think lost 2-3 maybe when the last time we played Miege. So certainly we have a great opportunity to go deep into this state tournament, and we're looking forward to it. OMS girls basketball, as Melodia said, is underway. Had our first game today against Lewisburg, working through some of those things to make sure that other schools are communicating with us effectively on how parents come in and out of games, making sure that we get through that. So we'll tighten up some things there. We continue to work through our Cognia standards for accreditation. Remember, it's almost November, and this is going to happen in January, so we're not very far away from that accreditation process. But we've finished all of the standards. We'll review those with administrators tomorrow. They'll go back to teachers at some point in time to make sure that we're ready to go. Friday is a no school day, so there's a no Friday for 3 weeks. Last week was the first one. This week will be number 2. Next week is the end of the quarter, so there's no school next week either. So this week is a PD day. Next week is a work day for teachers. So no school either of the next 2 Fridays. And this is something to think about as we finish up the end of the quarter next Thursday. That leaves us with only 2.5 weeks to Thanksgiving break. Once you return from Thanksgiving break, there's only 3 weeks to winter break, and then you're into 2021, and we can say goodbye to 2020, hopefully for good. But this is the time of year when you see those things begin to happen very quickly, and the weeks work through themselves quickly, and you have break after break after break until you get into the long haul of the school year, January through May. So a lot of great things happening. Good luck to our volleyball girls tomorrow. We wish them the best.
All right,
That's all I got.
thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting?
So move.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. And that passes 6-0.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.